People have been eating animal products for thousands of years. Doesn't that seem natural that we should keep doing it based on that?
I can take that one. Basically, the thrust of that question is suggesting that if a practice is going on for a long time and has become normalized in society, then it must be okay. But we already know that's not true, because obviously there are many practices that have been around for much of human history that we now know as deeply wrong. You know, for example, human slavery, women couldn't vote until 100 years ago. So eating animals wouldn't be the first extremely bad practice that was around for a very, very long time, was normalized in society and thought of as natural. But when we finally break such bad practices, it's a positive statement of progress for human society.
Yeah. Okay. What does animal agriculture have to do with antibiotic resistance bacteria?
Our factory farms have become breeding grounds for antibiotic resistant bacteria because the vast majority of the antibiotics used in the world today are not given to humans to help us recover from illness. They're given to livestock, not even to help them recover from illness, but as a routine dose with every dose of feed, because it makes them gain weight faster and because it helps keep them alive in deplorable conditions. So that's where most of our antibiotics are going, which means they're becoming breeding grounds. Some could say that our factory farms have become biological weapons factories. They're creating bacteria that is now killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. And we could be on the threshold of a post-antibiotic world where antibiotics kill millions of people within the next few decades annually worldwide, because the diseases that we've gotten used to antibiotics curing may no longer do so. And partly this is because of overuse in humans, but the strong majority of the use is in livestock. And that's where we have the most power to stop this.
And I'll just add to that quickly that there's massive profits for the pharmaceutical industry in animal agriculture, that we have to really be aware of that as vegans, that the pharmaceutical industry profits enormously, not only antibiotic use, but there's 10,000 different drugs and hormones that have been approved to be used on animals. And that all ends up in the flesh and secretions of these animals. And we take that in various ways, and it ends up in the environment, destroying a lot of the environment as well. So it's a really huge problem.
Yeah, and just to add to the numbers part of it, if you actually look up news articles on it, you'll see that we are already at the point where over 1 million human deaths a year around the world happen because of resistant bacteria. And that number will, as Ocean said, it would go up to tens of millions or more each year.
Hope, why don't you like to use the word factory farming anymore?
Okay, so let's see if I can do this quickly. So I'll just say that factory farming, the term is very powerful. It's done its job. It has really, for the last 30 years, driven home the horrible industry that these animals are commodified. They are in terrible situations. It's done its job. It really has. But because we've done our job as animal advocates and done such a wonderful job of exposing the horrors of animal agriculture, the industry is responding, and they're responding with labels and marketing and slogans and websites and videos of happy animals on, these new terms that we're seeing with organic and cage-free and free range and all of that. And so now what's happening is that there's a shift, and people are starting to say things like, well, yeah, I'm against factory farming. My meat isn't factory farmed. I buy it at Whole Foods. Or my eggs aren't factory farmed. I get them at the farmer's market. So we need to be careful now with our language, that there is a separation in people's minds. There is a differentiation. There's factory farming, bad factory farming that everybody can get behind and say, I don't want that. But it's not necessarily a vegan message anymore to say stop factory farming, because there is this alternative that's been offered by the industry of small scale and organic and free range and grass fed and all of that. So we need to be careful with the language. And I think that we should start saying things like that all animal agriculture is detrimental to the environment, all animal agriculture or all animal farming harms animals. Because when we just say factory farming, people in their minds are thinking, oh, well, I don't support factory farming. Of course not. But I'm going to buy these eggs. So we have to be sure that it's a vegan message. And I think that the term needs to be used in some instances, like with these bills that we're seeing about ban factory farming. I get that, we want to have that term for large scale differentiation, but when we're educating, we need to be careful not to get caught in this meme of our movement, factory farming, and back up and say all animal agriculture is bad, so.
Just quickly add to that, we've traveled the world and gone to dozens of animal sanctuaries where animals escape either factory farms or sort of smaller backyard operations. And we hear universally from people who operate these sanctuaries that the animals that come from factory farms and the animals that come from small operations, backyard operations, are severely abused. And in many cases, the smaller operations, the abuse is much more severe, either through neglect, gross neglect, or through sadistic treatment. So we really need to remember that these small operations are not necessarily better for the animals. And even the smaller slaughterhouses, some of the investigations done on those show that the workers are more sadistic towards the animals than on the big, gigantic slaughterhouses, which have the high line speeds. So really, this is a very important thing from the point of view of the animal suffering.
Okay, I'm going to ask that same question a different way. Is there really such thing as an ethical egg? How about humanely raised beef, chicken, or pork? How about humanely raised milk and cheese?
You'll probably get some diversity here, even within our panel. So let me just acknowledge that I think we're all pointing in a similar direction. We all want a more compassionate world. We all want a more sustainable world. We all want humans to be healthy, and we all want animals to live with dignity and respect and joy and not to be murdered so that we can give ourselves heart attacks, right? So there's all kinds of ethical problems with animal products, including the resource consumption that it takes to make them. And in that sense, pasture-raised, grass-fed tend to actually use more land, more water, more ecosystems, which means more forests cut down, more net climate impact. It's different climate impact, but in some ways it may actually be worse than feedlot or factory farm or animal factory or whatever term you want to use. That said, I do personally believe that chickens that are rummaging around in somebody's backyard, chomping away on compost, I think that's a better thing than a chicken that's cooped up in a cage so small it can't lift a wing, having its beak cut off, standing in feces its entire life, never seeing the sun or a blade of grass. I think that's different, and I do want to acknowledge that. And as somebody who cares about sentient beings, I've seen backyard chickens that were treated with love and that retired. When they stopped laying eggs, they were still fed and loved and cared for. And I've hung out with such birds, and they deepened my love for life. So I just want to acknowledge that difference. And at the same time, is that an ethical system? And are any of the eggs in our stores coming from genuinely happy chickens that were treated like that? Because you can't make a lot of money if you feed chickens after they stop laying eggs for another 5 or 8 years, right? And keep them going. So are they going to be killed? What are the ethics of that? But I personally see it as kind of a spectrum, if you will. And from my perspective, there is a difference in there. And I want to acknowledge that. And for every farm out there that moves towards giving chickens more space, outdoors, whatever, I consider that some small step. And it's not something I want to consume personally for environmental and health reasons, as well as ethical. But that doesn't mean that I don't have room. And if there are people watching right now who consume some animal products, I do think it matters to move in a more humane direction, but I don't think that's the goal personally for optimal health and well-being or ethical impact. But absolutely, it's a journey, and I want to, if you're somebody who eating one less meat meal a week is the step you can take right now. Like, I want to support you. I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for being here. And I also want to encourage you to not make that the end point, right? So every step we take matters. And that's kind of how I hold it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that was a good way of phrasing it. I mean, obviously, you can recognize that, you know, there are bad treatments and worse treatments, you know, like, and even worse treatments. So, so you can recognize that every step you're moving away is a good thing. But at the same time, the important thing to recognize is that's not your end goal, because the entire system of just seeing the animals as commodities as opposed to fellow beings, that was the original sin, and that, you know, we won't get away from this until that changes. So just don't make it your end goal, and we need to get to a place where we don't see them as foods, just like we wouldn't see a dog as a food.
I just want to quickly say that as you know, myself as a vegan now 42 years and doing advocacy, I would not ever encourage someone to go cage-free eggs or anything like that. I mean, if they want to do that, that's their choice. I tell them this is gratuitous suffering, because I think the thing is, people think, well, if you have a bunch of chickens and you're feeding them and taking care of them, I mean, that's great. It's much better being in my backyard than being in the jungle where you might get killed by an animal. And, you know, it's like we're helping them. So I think it's really important to help people realize that these animals have had their sovereignty stolen from them by us. They're not living life on their own terms. They evolved for millions of years to thrive in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and we violently tore them out of there, and we stuck them into an enclosure, and we took away their sovereignty, and we took away their freedom, and we supplied them their food. And it's a bunch of females with no males. It's a completely unnatural system where they're enslaved, and we're enslaved as a society, as human beings, enough that we don't see it. We don't recognize it. We don't see that we're so enslaved ourselves that when we enslave others, we think it's great. You know, when you put animals in a prison, you can rationalize it all day, but it's you've stolen something from them, and it's a wound that we've all endured, and that's why we don't see it. So I really emphasize that point, and then people can decide on their own where they want to draw the line.
Does eating animal products have anything to do with COVID or future viruses or pandemics?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a big one. I guess any of us could answer that. I mean, most of the major infectious diseases that have spread throughout human history have actually come from animals, in many cases livestock, whether, you know, and we don't know the origins of this particular virus. That's very controversial with COVID-19, but it's possible that it came from a meat market. It's also possible that it came from bats, and there's, you know, other human activities involved. We don't really know that, but if it was human generated in some way or human enabled in some way, that would be the exception. And we have so many viruses that have come from animals and livestock in specific. And, you know, add to that the breeding of antibiotic resistant bacteria that we talked about earlier, and the fact that any one of those bacteria that we might breed in an animal factory could leap over to humans and be completely resistant to antibiotics and spread like wildfire through the human race. And it's really considered just a matter of time that there will be more pandemics in the future. And it's a question of when and how bad. And the odds are very high that they will come to us from livestock in industrialized agricultural systems. That's just how the scientists are seeing it. Of course, we could add to that the fact that there was a recent study that came out that showed that people who ate a whole foods plant-based diet, this was a study over 6 countries, had 74% lower risk of COVID of severe COVID outcomes. And people who ate a high protein, low carb diet had a 48% higher risk of bad COVID outcomes, severe outcomes. So you put those two together, and the spread from high protein, low carb versus whole foods, plant-based, we're looking at a spread of like 85% difference in likelihood of getting severe outcomes. So arguably, when you think about all the deaths and all the suffering, I know there's a lot of controversy about COVID, but I'm just saying that a lot of what's gone down here as far as the suffering and all of the reaction and fear that's come about from that has been directly fueled by the poor health status of our population and the food that we've been eating.
Right. And I think at a deeper level, we should look at the underlying cause of this disease, and I think disease in general, because essentially we are so out of harmony with nature and with ourselves as people and as a society. And we have to question, I think, all of the official narratives around COVID, all of it, where it came from and what's causing it and what it is and so forth. And the huge amount of money that's being made and the huge loss of freedoms that's gone with it. And realize that if we're going to insist, I've been saying this for 30 years, if we're going to insist on oppressing animals, we're going to end up getting oppressed. I mean, I call it the boomerang effect. Whatever we sow, we reap. This is a basic universal teaching in all the world religions. If we're going to insist on force medicating billions of animals, we're going to end up getting force medicated ourselves. We're going to insist on tracking animals like they're commodities. We're going to end up getting tracked like animals ourselves, like we're commodities. We want to treat animals as livestock. We're going to end up as livestock ourselves. So the whole thing here is to have compassion for animals, liberate them if we're serious about having freedom for ourselves and health for ourselves. And so I think it's directly a result of animal agriculture, maybe not on the surface level, but on a deep level for sure.
And we've put so much emphasis on COVID, and there's so much energy around it right now that many people don't even realize that there is an avian flu outbreak right now in the poultry industry that is huge. On the East Coast, it's affected numerous states. They have had to kill millions of birds in the poultry industry. The farmed animal sanctuaries are very affected by it. They're having to keep all their birds indoors because this is one of the first ones that has actually transferred over to wild birds. And so it has jumped not species, but it's now gone to wild birds, and they're taking it around and spreading it around. And these things are happening again and again and again because of the massive commodification of these animals and confinement. And so it's just going to continue, and one of these days, possibly soon and hopefully not, but it's going to be that terrible combination of incredibly infectious and incredibly deadly. I mean, we were lucky with COVID-19 that it didn't kill way more people. So I think that we have to look at the interconnection of all of this systematic oppression, systematic really big picture issues that we're having that are all so deeply connected. And of course, reducing and eliminating animal products is such a huge part of that in healing all of this. So,
yeah, and I would say I use an analogy for this, needle sharing. So, like, there are novel viruses out there, so you can't get the risk down to zero. If we all went vegan, it won't be zero, but it'll be near zero. And if you compare that to animal agriculture and the wildlife trade, that just ups the risk of pandemics so much higher that we are now living in a time of pandemic scares or full-blown events every few years. And it also doesn't matter whether this particular one was a lab leak or through animal agriculture, because when an event like this happens that takes the world out, basically, and should any smart, rational society would say, we can't let this happen again. And so you would have to you'd have to look at all of the possible needle sharing activities. So put more, strengthen lab requirements, but also take care of animal agriculture once and for all, because we know the 1918 flu took out 50 million people. That was before modern factory farming. And the best scientific knowledge is that it came from a chicken farm in Kansas. So we know that that's like to say, you know, that we should only do something about a lab leak or whatever and not animal agriculture is like saying, well, they were doing needle sharing with brand X and we're doing needle sharing with brand Y, so it has nothing to do with us, which makes no sense at all. Just stop the needle sharing.